Russia never acquired the membership properly, so we cannot exclude someone who was never included.
Russia uses the veto in order to avoid accountability, in particular accountability for Russia's own egregious violations of international law.
Russia is illegally occupying a place in the UN as much as it illegally occupies the territory of Ukraine, of Georgia, and of other countries that it has invaded throughout its history.
Bonjour, vous regardez l'épisode de l'Ukraine en flammes, une chaîne YouTube en français par l'Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Je m'appelle Tetiana Ogarkova et dans son projet, on vous raconte comment l'Ukraine résiste face à l'agression russe. Dans l'épisode d'aujourd'hui, nous allons parler de la place de la Russie au Conseil de sécurité à l'ONU. Malgré les violations continues du droit international, la Russie est toujours membre permanent du Conseil de sécurité à l'ONU. Elle a donc le droit de veto et elle peut bloquer toute décision prise par le Conseil. Rappelons un peu l'histoire. Lorsqu'en 1991, la Russie a pris le siège au Conseil que l'URSS occupait en tant que l'État fondateur de l'ONU, elle n'avait aucune base légale pour le faire. En effet, il n'y avait pas de pays avec un nom officiel de Fédération de Russie. Ce n'était qu'en 1992, en fait, après tous les changements constitutionnels que le nom a été adopté. Également, la Russie n'a pas légalement indiqué qu'elle était un successeur de l'URSS. Rappelons aussi que ce n'est qu'en 2020 que Poutine a amendé la constitution russe dans ce sens. Si vous souhaitez en savoir plus, continuez à regarder cette vidéo et n'oubliez pas à abonner à notre chaîne YouTube pour ne pas manquer nos vidéos à venir. Après l'invasion russe de l'Ukraine en 2022, les diplomates ukrainiens tels que l'ambassadeur ukrainien à l'ONU Serhiy Kyslitsa ou le ministre des Affaires étrangères Dmytro Nataloukha ont appelé à plusieurs reprises en fait à la suspension, à l'expulsion de la Russie des Nations Unies et la suppression de son droit de veto. Plus à ce sujet, commençons par écouter Iouri Loutsenko, cofondateur de l'ONG qui s'appelle Civic Hub International, qui travaille en collaboration avec des diplomates ukrainiens et internationaux. Écoutons.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Russian Federation in the United Nations, because the question that is being asked, especially after a number of pronouncements, the question that is being asked that they need to exclude the Russian Federation from the UN Security Council. And our team of the initiative group of the Civic Hub team, we're insisting on the fact that this is really not the right wording, because obviously, absolutely obviously, the workings of the UN Security Council are blocked because of Russia's position. And it has been like this for years and years and years. In fact, Russia has used veto powers more times than any other members of the permanent members of the UN Security Council combined. So while the question of Russia blocking the workings of the UN Security Council is correct, the question of excluding the Russian Federation from UN Security Council has to be posed somewhat differently for the following reason. The thing is, Russia is in the UN illegally. That's the whole point. Because in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed and ceased to exist as a geopolitical reality and legal entity, Russia was a new country. It had to apply vis-a-vis UN. Russia was a new country, and it had to apply from scratch, just like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Moldova, so on and so forth, all other countries of the former Soviet Union. So rather than talking about excluding Russia from the Security Council, we have to talk about the fact that Russia is present, and we are insisting on our team of the Civic Hub Initiative Group is insisting that it's not about excluding, it's stopping Russia's illegitimate presence at the UN in general. Because you see, the fact that Russia is in the Security Council, this is a consequence of the fact that Russia is in the UN. Okay? because Security Council is a working body of the United Nations, right? Right. And then we're going back to the following question. How was it possible that Russia has become, ended up in the United Nations without going through all of the proper procedures? And, you can read all of this materials. Our team calls it the biggest geopolitical swindle of the 20th century. When vis-a-vis UN Charter, the only two foundations, so to say, for Russia to become present, again, I'm insisting on this, become present at the UN, because Russia never acquired the membership properly. So we cannot exclude someone who was never included, right? So the entire foundation for Russia's presence at the United Nations are two pieces of paper. One is so-called Almaty papers. Again, we call them papers because they bear no significance whatsoever for the UN. And number two is Yeltsin's letter, where they're saying, oh, we used to be Soviet Union, now we are Russia. Change of the nameplates. Bottom line is we have to raise the issue of Russia's illegitimate presence at the UN. Then there are a number of mechanisms that I'll talk about it a little later. And we have to understand that Russia's presence at the Security Council is a consequence of Russia's illegitimate presence at the United Nations in general. What can be done and the number of options here? Well, there are a number of options. And when can it be done? It can take anywhere from a month to about a year, I would say, if we go through the route of the so-called Credential Committee, because we have developed a very, very strong legal base. And when I say we, is our international team of the initiative group of Civic Hub, which our team includes the best scholars of international law on this earth, right? So we have developed a very strong legal argument that Russia's presence at the UN is totally illegitimate. Now, if that is taken into consideration, then we will go through so-called South African route through the Credential Committee. What it means is that the Credential Committee of the United Nations, before each session, they verify the credentials, and even through the Credential Committee, the South African delegation was not allowed to be present at the UN from 1969 to 1984.
Il y a plus qu'assez de raisons morales et judiciaires pour que la Russie perde son siège au Conseil de sécurité de l'ONU. Mais est-ce que c'est réellement possible de le faire légalement? Par exemple, quelle est la procédure d'exclusion d'un pays du Conseil et est-ce que cela a été déjà fait auparavant? Dr Thomas D. Grant, avocat international et professeur à l'université de Cambridge, a des réponses à toutes ces questions. Écoutons-le.
The UN Charter provides for expelling a member country where the country has persistently violated principles of the UN Charter. There's no real doubt that Russia is responsible for violations of international law that justify removing Russia from the UN, not just from the UN Security Council, but from the UN as a whole. Now, though the UN has never expelled a member, it has taken steps to limit or to suspend the participation of a member. In 1956, the UN prevented Hungary from participating. This was after the USSR had invaded Hungary and imposed a puppet regime on that country. For the years 1956, 57, and 58, the UN kept Hungary's representatives out of the organization. Then, in 1974, the UN prevented South Africa from participating. This was in response to South Africa refusing to end its apartheid racist system of government. How did the UN do this? How did it prevent a country from participating, even though it didn't expel the country outright? In both cases, Hungary in 1956, South Africa in 1974, the UN General Assembly used its procedural rules. It's under the credentials procedure that the UN Security Council could vote to reject Russia's credentials. But wouldn't Russia veto any proposal to prevent Russia from participating in the Council? After all, Russia holds a permanent member seat in the Council, and every permanent member has the power of veto. Veto, however, applies only to matters of legal substance in the Council. A veto does not apply to decisions of procedure. Credentials decisions are decisions of procedure. Accordingly, Russia could not use the veto to block the Council from rejecting Russia's credentials. Now, in the Security Council, Russia fills the seat allocated under the UN Charter to the Soviet Union, the USSR. Ukraine's foreign minister recently has observed that Russia came to fill the USSR seat in December 1991. The foreign minister has raised the question whether Russia coming to fill the USSR seat was constitutionally proper. It's a serious question. Mr. Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, is in good company when he asks it. One of the preeminent international lawyers of the latter part of the 20th century, Professor Yehuda Blum, who held the Hirsch-Lauterpacht Chair of International Law at the University of Jerusalem, and in fact had represented his country at the UN for a number of years, doubted whether it was constitutionally proper for Russia to fill the old Soviet seat. Ukraine has good reason to remind UN members of the manner in which Russia came to fill the Soviet seat, which was at best idiosyncratic. And Ukraine also has good reason to remind UN members of the manner in which Russia uses that seat. Since 1991, Russia has been by far the most prolific among permanent members in wielding the veto. Russia has wielded the veto repeatedly to block the Council from responding to Russia's aggression against Ukraine, among other abuses of the veto. And let's make no mistake, Russia does not use the Security Council veto in order to champion the underdeveloped world or the global South, or to stand up against some supposed coalition of bad actors. Russia uses the veto in order to avoid accountability, in particular accountability for Russia's own egregious violations of international law. For the Security Council to use its credentials procedure to exclude Russia would follow practically to the letter well-tested UN precedent. It would open the door for the Council to act on substantive matters such as Russia's war crimes and Russia's legal responsibility to pay financial compensation to Ukraine for the injuries that Russia's aggression has caused. Moreover, it would demonstrate the Council's resolve against the most serious challenge to the UN Charter since the inception of the organization.
Enfin, écoutons Dmytro Nataloukha, qui est membre du Parlement ukrainien. Il partagera des informations sur la pétition qui, avec le soutien du président de l'Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky, demande à l'ONU de fournir les documents prouvant que la Russie occupe à juste titre son siège au Conseil de sécurité de l'ONU. Lors de son discours, vous verrez aussi un QR code qui vous mènera vers le site où vous pouvez signer cette pétition. Ensemble, nous pouvons mettre fin à la présence russe au Conseil de sécurité de l'ONU.
I'm going to tell you about one of the biggest swindles in the history of international politics and international diplomacy, which is Russia illegally occupies a place in the United Nations and in the United Nations Security Council. In 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia appeared and emerged as a new member of the United Nations and of the United Nations Security Council, without anyone voting for it as for a new country, and without any procedure of succession, because the United Nations Charter holds no provisions of succession by one country to another. So how did that happen, that in 1991, Russia appeared there out of the blue and became both the member of the United Nations and the permanent member of the United Nations Security Council? The answer is by simply replacing the name tags or the nameplates from Soviet Union to Russian Federation. Now, this allows Russia until today to abuse its veto power and to block any initiatives in the United Nations that might help to end this war of aggression that Russia has launched on Ukraine. Simply saying, Russia is illegally occupying a place in the UN as much as it illegally occupies the territory of Ukraine, of Georgia, and of other countries that it has invaded throughout its history. Now, we have taken this matter in our hands and have launched a petition that has gathered more than 250,000 signatures to kick Russia out of the UN. We have adopted a resolution in the Ukrainian parliament that recognizes that Russia is illegally present in the United Nations. We have addressed the national governments, the national parliaments of our friends and allies and asked them to do the same, to address their own foreign ministries, their own secretaries of foreign affairs, their own national delegations to the United Nations, to kick Russia out of the UN because it has no legal grounds to be there as a member. And this is the same that you can do. You can sign and share the petition to kick Russia out of the UN, and you can address your national parliaments, your national governments, your diplomatic sector, and ask them to kick Russia out of the United Nations because Russia has never belonged there. Russia is illegally occupying a place in the UN, and we should put an end to this, as much as we should put an end to the brutal aggression Russia Federation has launched on Ukraine in 2022.
C'était l'épisode de l'Ukraine en flammes, projet de l'Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Je m'appelle Tetiana Ogarkova et nous n'allons pas tarder à enregistrer et diffuser d'autres épisodes. Dans la description sous cette vidéo, vous trouverez des informations utiles sur la manière dont vous pouvez aider l'Ukraine à résister face à l'agression russe. Si vous trouvez notre travail utile, n'hésitez pas à le partager ou à commenter cette vidéo. Restez avec nous et soutenez l'Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!